we are in a war against an evil, an invisible evil. Making a huge battle against him with the help of some medical equipment, hand sanitizer, mask, social distance. These are the opportunity. So in this way, discussing about the hidden faces of COVID-19, the unseen sides of COVID-19. What are the unseen sides of COVID-19? There are a lot of unseen effects or a lot of people affected by this COVID, but are not published in journals or any other newspapers because they are some person which means they are invisible to the society, which means they don't have proper identity cards or other documents. So, but they are hugely affected by this COVID. We all know a lot of people, a lot of people struggling for their livelihood. So these are other effects of COVID. We know only of if when we affected COVID, we will suffer with asthmatic, like we will behave like an asthma affected one, fever. These are the open effects of COVID. But what are the unseen face of COVID? Same face of it's very, very dangerous. Very it's an unhealthy one because lot of people, I already told, lot of people lost their job, lot of people struggle with livelihood, and lot of and the major problem is majority of people lost their efficiency after the when they are affected by COVID because level will be reduced after the post-COVID session. It affects the efficiency of the people too. So there are a lot of unseen sides of COVID, or there is a hidden face for COVID-19. So let me come to my responsibility. So on the behalf of BAM College, I would like to welcome Mr. Christy Varghese, our resource person. Is a well-renowned person in the field of history. He's graduated from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and he joined JNU for his post-graduation. And after his post-graduation, he got his MPhil, Master of Philosophy from Calicut University, and also he is the member of Kerala History Congress, and is doing a lot for his field. And now he is working as an assistant professor in Department of History. He's the head of the department in Malabar, Christy, and so, sir, I'm very proud to welcome you to this program. Welcome, sir. Okay, sir.
Thank you.
So, and also I welcome all the other members who are gathered here, which means online gathered. So gathered here, please, you are welcome to the meeting. And I think let's start the program. I invite Mr. Christy Varghese for presenting his paper on contemplating. Present your paper, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Arun. But am I audible? I think there is some issue with the range. Am I audible? Is it okay? Can you hear me?
It's okay, sir. You are audible.
Okay, so because if there is an issue, I can change the network. That's why I'm asking. Am I audible properly, or is there any blur, or is there any issues with the sound or something?
As of now,
No,
it
sir,
is
no
fine,
problem with
sir.
your voice. You can
It's fine. Okay, and also the presentation, is the presentation mode active? Like I'm new to the Microsoft Teams, so I'm just a bit worried about that. So is it the presentation mode on? Can you see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, sir, we can see the PowerPoint. It's fine.
Okay, okay, fine. Then it's fine. That's fantastic. So, good afternoon, one and all. Thank you very much for the cordial welcome that has been extended to me by Mr. Arun. So, I hope Mr. Arun will be handling the session also. So, I'll be conversing with Mr. Arun. And when I was thinking about this topic, we will directly go to the topic, then we'll have some chit chat afterwards. So we were just thinking about this topic. What struck to my mind was this famous couplet by the German poet Bernard Brecht. He says, or his famous lines goes like this: "In the dark times, will there be singing?" Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. Now, these are the dark times of novel coronavirus or the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know it. Now, it is a very unprecedented time. You and me, we all are into this in a completely new system, completely new way of negotiating with our reality. Now, from the day of March 11th, 2020, the day in which the WHO has declared COVID as a pandemic, humanity is just surviving and it is not even living. So people have been pushed by this paranoia, by all this loss of hope, by the lost count of the notions of time. The many people have lost their life and their livelihood. So at the outset, let me extend my, or let me pay my homage to all those who have lost their life in this pandemic situation. And also let me take the opportunity to show my gratitude towards all those frontline workers who have been engaged on a day-to-day basis in their struggle for the existence of the humanity. And also let me wish for regaining hope of the multitudes who have lost their hope. Now, to go back to what Bertolt Brecht, the German poet, was saying, I am also actually here planning to do this singing in the dark times of COVID-19. The song that I would like to sing is titled as Contemplating Nationalism in the Pandemic World. And this song comes under the larger chorus that has been set by the Bishop Abraham Memorial College, Thuruthicad, which attempts to understand the unseen sides of COVID-19. So, just to understand, like, how much time can I take? How much time should I take for presentation? Hello?
Yes, sir.
How much time can I take for presentation?
So the session is from so 2 to 3:30. You can take time up to 3:30, sir.
Okay, so I'll speak till 3 o'clock, then we'll go for discussion. Is that fine?
Okay, sir, fine.
Okay, okay. So the first thing, so what we will be doing is, we will start with nationalism. We will try to develop an introductory framework to the idea of nationalism. Then we went on to discuss the history of the making of nationalism. Then we have some theoretical aspects about the theories of nationalism. And from there, we'll move on to how the pandemic or how is the COVID has altered our conception of nationalism, of which I will be putting out a couple of points and mainly 3 large questions that I would be posing up to the audience, and then we will summarize the talk and then we will move on to the discussion part. So that is a general plan that has been trying to be executed here. So moving as the beginning, nationalism introduction, or to introduce nationalism to you, the first thing that could come to my mind in that sense is the famous dictum by Saint Augustine. Now, most of us are aware about Saint Augustine. Now, Saint Augustine has said this famous dictum of himself that he says, if one asks me, I know. If I want to explain it to someone who does ask me, I don't know. Now, that is the issue that most of us face in our life. We all know things, but when it comes to explain that thing to a professor or to a colleague or to a friend or to your family, then it gets difficult. Now, despite the gradual fading of this dictum by Saint Augustine, it still acts as an imperative. Now, this dictum is very much correct when you deal with abstract entities. There is much room for conundrum in analyzing abstract ideas like modernity. Now, when one dwells into this idea of modernity, at least two catchy terms stands out. One is nationalism and the other one is capitalism. Now, on capitalism, this idea of capitalism is actually at least been countered on a theoretical basis by the Marxian and the socialist utopias. But nations whose premature death has been forecasted from its inception itself is thriving like a wildfire. Now, it has more or less become a normative to have a nation. Now, why I say it is a normative, it is like a something which is unavoidable, inevitable. It's like more like having a biological mother or a gender. If you are born, you will have a mother. If you are born, you will have your gender. That is a kind of normative ideas that we are having, right? So on that basis, nationalism has also become what? A normative concept, in the sense, no matter what, you will always have a nation to associate with. You are impired by your idea of nation. Now, nationalism is a truly global phenomenon. Now, it has emerged in the most countries of the world, and it has made its presence
Sir, Christy sir.
Can you hear me? Hello?
No, there's.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Right now it's okay. Yes, right
Now it's
okay.
Now it's okay, right? The presentation mode is also okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine. So video, audio, presentation, all three are fine, right?
Yeah. No problem.
Okay,
Right
fine.
now there's no problem. Okay, you can proceed.
Okay, so yes, so I was talking about nationalism. So nationalism being the most forceful ideology of the time, it has manifested itself in everything. And in the present day, the influence of nationalism is so deeply intoxicated that one tends to believe that nations were an historical inevitability, and it was perennial, in the sense that there was always nation. Now, if you are telling this to a social science student or a history student, he will be laughing or she will be laughing, particularly because of the reason history pulls this idea or push out this idea that nation was a historical inevitability, or to see the idea of nation as a perennial thing. Nations were never perennial. Nations are a particular product of time that has emerged during the 19th or the 20th or the 18th century. Now, prior to that, what we understand by nation is no longer existing. So what we should do is, we should have a look on what the history of nation is, and also the theories that has been put forward by nation, or largely the theory theories of nationalism. Excuse me. So when we speak of nationalism, we speak of a period between the 18th century to the 20th century. Why? Because it is particularly during that period a large number of small local communities began to be transformed into larger and homogeneous communities. Now, what distinguishes this community from the earlier community was the new community of nation state which was been emerging. This was largely an invisible group of community. Now, the earlier group forms, like whatever been existed in the past, like the village communities or the speech community, the tribals, the local groups, all these things, these were based on familiarity. That means to say, all the members of the community knew each other, or they have a face-to-face recognition, by name recognition of most of the people of that community. Now, in national state, the two fundamental ideas that distinguishes it from the political formations of the past is particularly unfamiliarity and anonymity. Because for a person who is sitting in Kerala, he actually doesn't know who is in Kashmir, or this Kashmir guy has no idea who is sitting in Gujarat, or this Gujarat guy doesn't have any idea who is sitting in Arunachal Pradesh. So despite having this anonymity and unfamiliarity, there exists an imagination of the community to believe that a national state is constituted under the process or under the auspices of the grand narrative of nationalism or the ideology of nationalism. So, looking from that point of view, nationalism is a complex phenomenon, isn't it? Because if you look at it, all the developed industrial societies of the Europe, they have nationalism. At the same time, all those underdeveloped Asian and Pacific regions, they also have nationalism. Now, those societies, consider the case of Asia or Africa and Europe, all these societies, they have very little things in common, isn't it? Now, these things which they have very little in common, but still the ideology and the idea of nationalism has pervaded over them, or they have all brought together under the large rubric or the grand narrative of nationalism. So this appears to us that there must be a general or a universal explanation of nationalism, but at the same time, there is some specific and contextual reasons for the emergence of nationalism. So a theory of nationalism needs to be accommodative of both these general trends and also of the specific reasons to which each national state has been acquired. So all nations have something in common, but at the same time, all nations are differentiated and distinguished with its own contours. Okay, so that means to say, to emerge or to define or come with a definition of nation, it is not an easy task. Why? Because the main trouble is whichever definition you give. Any issue?
No, sir, no problem. You can continue, sir.
Continue. Yeah. So what I was trying to was the idea of developing a definition for. I can continue, right?
Right, sir, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So the idea of developing a definition of nationalism is not a simple task, because the main trouble is whichever definition you gave, it is not all encompassing. There will always be some nations which are left out. So scholars, what they have done is they have generally refrained from this idea of giving a grand narrative or the grand definition of nationalism per se. Rather, they have come up with this idea of nationalism on the basis of some or the other nation states. So now what we'll do is let's have a look at the theories of nationalism or the theorist of nationalism for that matter. Now, for understanding, let's take up with this whole concept of nationalism, which is a contentious issue, and a consensual definition for the same has not been arrived till now. So, if we were to trace the trajectory of the historiography of nationalism, now this would be to bring out at least the works of the following scholars. We need to start with the work of Ernest Renan, the French historian who has come up with this idea of daily referendum in his work, What is Nation? Now, there is that followed by Joseph Stalin, the famous Marxist. He has written this book or pamphlet in 1913, titled as Marxism and the National Question. Here he comes up with this idea of common culture to understand nationalism. Now then there is a famous scholar, Ernest Gellner, which you all are aware of, whose famous work is Nations and Nationalism of 1983, in which he tries to talk about this congruence of political unit and the social unit. Then you have the pre-modernists like Anthony D. Smith, who comes up with this work of theories of nationalism on 1971. Now, Anthony D. Smith is completely coming out with a version which is completely against his own guru or his own mentor, his own professor Gellner, who Gellner takes up a modernist stand, and Anthony D. Smith takes up a pre-modernist stand. Now, pre-modernist stand in the sense that he tries to see his nationalism drawing from the pre-existing history of the groups or the cultural imbibing from the communities that were during that time. Now, you might have all been aware of this famous Warwick University debates between Anthony D. Smith and Ernest Gellner. Now, again, you have this Eric Hobsbawm, who is a famous historian we all follow in British. He comes up with this 1983 book, this idea of invented tradition or the invention of tradition, in which he tries to see nationalism as something which is inventing tradition to sustain itself. Now, these all works are there, but something which has always fascinated and something which has always made the community of scholars and the community of social scientists believe in the theory and apply the theory of nationalism is none other than the work of Mr. Benedict Anderson or Dr. Benedict Anderson, whose 1983 work, which is titled as Imagine Communities, Reflections on the Origin and Spread of Nationalism. Now, in this work, he comes up with this idea, or he rather defines nation as an imagined political community. Now, it is imagined both as limited and sovereign. So I'm not going into the details of why it is an imagined community, or for that matter, why it is limited and sovereign. I think that have already been discussed quite a lot. So what I'm trying to say is all these things, all these theorists who comes up with this idea of and their grand theories of nationalism are in some way or other trying to reason out and trying to understand what is nationalism, isn't it? So this question is always there. What is nationalism? This question is tried to be understood and analyzed and tried to be questioned by most of the scholars in their own ways. Now, none of these ideas of theories of or the theories of nationalism is all encompassing, which I already told. They all give their own versions about nationalism. Now, this doesn't end there. Even after Benedict Anderson, there are questions that is being raised about the idea of nationalism. The present paper, which I am talking to you or which I am presenting to you right now, is actually a continuation of this discussions on nationalism. So the main question is, what is nationalism? And how do we understand nationalism during this COVID times? Okay, So that is largely the question that we are trying to say with the question of COVID and nationalism. Okay. Now, just out of curiosity, I would like to ask, like, what are the kind of participants we have here? Is it the degree students or no, it's a degree PG or? I can see so many names over here, but I'm just worried, like, what kind of student?
Sir, we have all the level of persons, teachers, professors, PG students, and degree students also here.
Okay, fine. So that I expected to see it's a mixed category. So before starting upon this discussion on, now I have given a larger introductory framework on what nationalism is, the theories of nationalism and the history of nationalism. So before moving into this COVID and nationalism, I would like to open up the space. Like, would any one of you would like to comment on this question of COVID and nationalism? Have you ever thought of this idea of COVID and nationalism? How has nationalism as a process or nationalism as a question arises at the larger question of COVID? Because COVID is something which we all are confronting. We, in the sense, the larger humanity and that of the human beings as a whole. So, would anyone like to comment? Any student, any teacher, anyone? I would be more happy if students are commenting because they want to interact with the students. You can give a try. I mean, you can speak in whichever language you want, no issues. You can speak in English or Malayalam or Hindi or Tamil or Urdu. I know this much language. I don't know any other languages. So these languages welcome. What could be the relation between COVID and nationalism? Would anyone like to comment?
Sir, COVID reduced the intensity of. So COVID reduced the intensity of globalization because many nations made wars against them.
Yes. Very good, sir. It is a very good point. I think that is a very valid point he has made. And I think you are faculty of economics, right? Economics. So you are faculty of economics,
Yes.
right? Yes. I think that is why you have been talking about globalization, because economics people are always connected with trade and globalization. So this is particularly from that point of view, this question is being erased, or this question which you can see in your PowerPoint presentation right now is at the end of the phase of nationalism. Just like our Edward Sir has pointing out, nationalism is reducing its power. Nationalism is waging out in the time of globalization. Now, in the time of globalization, nationalism is wading out. Now, on the above of that, on the above of this globalized world, we had a COVID situation. Whatever Edward Sir was saying, I am in complete support of him in a globalized world. But my own personal take on this question is the phase of nationalism ending. I will say it is no. I will discontent with whatever Edward Sir was pointing out, because his idea on a globalized world could be correct, but my views, I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just putting forward my idea, that is nationalism is actually re-emerging like anything in the post-COVID world. Many people have predicted the end of nationalism, because in a globalized world, we have a global village, the idea of a global village, the internationalization in which the concept of nation is being wading out. But that is not what has been happening here. You look at it. It is a global question. COVID is a global question. COVID, or the novel coronavirus, has started in a particular place in China, Wuhan, and from there it has transmitted to the entire universe. or the entire world. So it's a global question. It's no longer a question of China. It's a global question. It's a global situation that the humanity is facing. But what is the answer to this global question? The answer to this global question is not emerging from a global answer. The answer is emerging from a national point of view. Actually, what we wanted here is a global coordination and a global answer to a global question. But what we are having here right now is a national answer to a global question. Why I am saying national answer is particularly because of the reason we are trying to curb nationalism not on a global level, but we are trying to curb nationalism on a national level. Our focus is on nation. Our focus is not on the globe. This is connected with the question of vaccine nationalism. Now, what is vaccine nationalism? Vaccine nationalism is a particular sort of the hyper nationalism that you can see in which the developed countries hold or keep their intellectual property right within the hold of themselves to make sure that they are having enough of the vaccine jabs. At the same time, the less developed nations are begging for it. The whole idea of make America great again, the America first, all these ideas comes up with this vaccine nationalism. It is going hand in hand. So this vaccine nationalism is the one reason what you can say nationalism is not subsiding, but nationalism is re-emerging like anything in the post-COVID world. Now you look at this question of social distancing. We all are practicing social distancing. Social distancing is one thing that has been highly recommended during the COVID time. Now, but what we don't realize, or the unseen side of COVID is, with this idea of social distancing, there is something which is deeply enrooted, which is the conception of the other. Whom are we distancing ourselves from? We are distancing ourselves from the other person, other community, other gender, other individual, other community, other nation, other state. There is a lot of binaries that has been created for this social distancing. Malayali versus non-Malayali, Indian versus foreigner, American versus non-American, West versus the non-West, Asian versus the Europe. Now it is on the concept or the basement of this conception of other. The idea of social distancing is working. So we can say class distinctions are reaching at the zenith, or class distinctions are reaching at its peak during this idea of social distancing. We all are aware of this idea put forward by the former POTUS, the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. He addressed this not as the novel coronavirus or COVID, but he addressed it as Chinese virus. There is also Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor. She didn't allow the vaccines to go out to the other places. So with this COVID, what we actually see is not just the waning of nationalism, but rather the deepening of nationalism. Now, when you look at it, all the crisis times, if you study history, all the crisis times have allowed the nation state to exercise its power to its maximum. Be it in the world wars, be it in the internal emergencies of India, always crisis time helps the nation state to build up itself. So on the basis of this crisis time, nationalism as an ideology and nation as a political entity is going to thrive like anything. So what I am trying to tell you was, nationalism and nation state is not going to end with COVID. Rather, nationalism and nation state is going to get deepened with COVID. So then comes the next question. If nationalism is deepening, what is the kind of nation state that we are having? Would anyone like to comment? This comes the next question. What kind of nation state are we moving to? Anyone got any idea what kind of national state are we moving to? We said nationalism is going to stay here. So what kind of nation state are we going to witness? Is it just a welfare state? In my idea, what I think is nation state or the nationalism, what we are going to witness, or what we are rather witnessing for the time period, is the conception of a bureaucratic totalitarian regime. Because if you look at it, most of the nation states are moving or they are adopting emergency powers like curfews, night ban, lockdown. Now, what is this conception of emergency power? Emergency power is such a thing which can be exercised only during the time where there is an excess, and there is also the need of non-accountability of the governments to its citizens. What is exactly happening in the case of a totalitarian regime? It is almost sure that we have went into a police raj. Just remember yourself or just remind yourself of the things what were happening for us when we were going out of a lockdown. I'm not saying we should not have lockdowns, but I'm saying the way that lockdown was implemented in different nations. I'm not just talking about India. I'm talking about the global scenario. It was with pressure. So it was particularly giving or shifting from a bureaucratic democratic system to a bureaucratic system, which strengthens the bureaucracy to act and use its emergency power whenever and wherever it wishes. Now, a connected phenomena, what you can see along with this is the missing out or the losing out of the spaces of criticality, because COVID issue or the corona issue is no longer a mere health issue. It is conceived as an issue of national security. It's conceived as an issue of national independence and an issue of national importance. So any deviation from the fight against COVID or the fight against corona is a fight against the nation. If you are criticizing any of the policies that the government has adopted by any government, be it in New Zealand or India or US, against the COVID measures, you will be seen as someone who is criticizing the government and who is criticizing the nation per se. So this idea is actually taking out the example of losing spaces of criticality and critical evolution of the spaces. Now, to give you an example, let's take the example of New Zealand. Now, New Zealand, let me be very clear about it in the beginning itself. I am very much in appreciation of New Zealand. I like its Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. She's doing just wonderful, being as not only as a leader, as a political hope, and also as a person who has perfectly handled the COVID virus. I accept it. But looking from the point of view which I was trying to mention to you, the New Zealand case is a particular scenario in which there is the potentiality of the emergence of bureaucratic system or the bureaucratic state. I hope I am making the idea clear. Now, for moving on, there is also an inevitable movement towards the emergence of a surveillance state. Now, why would I say like that? It is particularly because of my readings of this Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari. You might have all heard about Harari. Harari is one of the most acclaimed and the most popular and most read historian of the COVID times. He has written mainly 3 books which is very popular. The Sapiens, the Homo Deus, and the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. All these are must-read books for any person who is doing social sciences. Now, nation states or nationalism or the nations per se, the developed nations particularly, they were all surveillance state. We were all under the paranoia of surveillance every time. The idea of big brother is watching you was always there with us. No, but what happened in this COVID time is this has actually deepened like anything. Look at the Arogya Setu app that we are using. Now, the question that has been posted before us is, what do you care? Do you care about your health or your privacy? It is not a question of health and privacy. It is a question of health or privacy. Now, this is the unseen side of COVID. This is what we are not realizing. We are only being taken up by this idea of health issues or the health emergency. But what we are losing or the unseen side of COVID-19 is, the question is not health and privacy. The question is health or privacy. If you want your health, you need to shield away your privacy. There is lot of biological surveillances that has been happening. You remember when this quarantine happened, we were locked up in room and there was posters being held behind our walls and on the doors of our homes and all. Now these are surveillances because the people with COVID viruses are seen as potential threats, not just for the society, but for the nation per se. So they need to be isolated. They need to be kept apart. You understand what I'm saying? So this technology has empowered the state like anything, and it has deprived the citizens at the same time. So on the basis of this biometric surveillances, there is high possibility that we are witnessing and moving towards a surveillance state. Now, to move on, again, to bring up this concept of Benedict Anderson, in which he comes up with this idea of imagined community. And for imagine this community, we always imagine something called as a territory. Right. Now, I just want to ask one question to anyone who is over here. What was our conception of territory during the COVID time? On a normal time, we used to think of India, right? We know what the geography of India is. Okay. Now, what is the concept or what is our conception of territory during COVID times? Would anyone like to answer? What did you think of territory? Like, what was your idea of territory during the COVID? The idea of territory has completely changed during the COVID times. Yeah, someone was talking. Hello?
Sir, I have an answer.
Yeah, please say.
Sir, say if I'm in a containment zone, then that's my territory.
Yes.
I'm not allowed to break that territory.
So that is exactly what the case is, sir. Your conception about the territory has changed during that time. My world is that containment zone. Earlier, I didn't want passport, I didn't want ID card, I didn't want the Satyavangmulam or the declaration, I didn't want the police pass. any of these things to travel anywhere in India. Now I belong to Adur. I belong to Pathanamthitta. I belong to Adur. So I used to travel from Adur to Calicut, the place where I everywhere. So the territory to which I as a person and I as an individual can utilize or claim my right to has reduced from nation to the state to the district to the panchayat. So my territorial conception of my state or my nation has reduced to the extent of my own home or my own house if my family is affected by COVID. Now this is a radical reconceptualization of the territory or the territorial conceptions that we have about our nation state. Now why saying much? From our houses, our territory has been again reduced to our body. If you are from Kerala, you need to get an RT-PCR test if you need to travel to Karnataka. Even today's headlines, it was there. So what I'm trying to say is, your body becomes a marker. Your body becomes a site of contestation. Your body becomes an arena in which nationalism is operating. The nation state is operating. The apparatus of the state is operating. The power of the state is operating. I hope I am making it clear. Now to move on, apart from all these things, I would like to bring out what is the specific with the Indian scenario. Apart from these things which is happening globally, which is common to India also, there are certain things which is happening specific to India, which again goes as the unseen side of COVID, which we are not realizing. First and the final question that will be posed is the idea of federation of states falling out. Now what is India? India is a union of states or a federation of states. We have different states coming together and all states have equal importance. Now all these states constitute the Indian nation, though the power to the states are derived from the constitution. Now, but what we are having over here is, here we are not worried about the rest of our neighboring states. The focus is only on my state. People from Kerala are a potential threat to my state, so I will not allow anyone to go to Kerala from my state. I will never allow anyone from Kerala to come to my state. So this idea of nationalism is changing there so much. The idea of nation state is changing. Your idea of conception of the neighboring states are changing. Your idea of federal structure of the constitution enslaved by the constitution and guaranteed by the national state of India is changing. You remember the long queues that we had in our borders during the pandemic. People were not allowed to come to Kerala. The Kerala state didn't want them to come. I'm not here to blame the Kerala government or the Karnataka government. Okay, this purpose of this lecture or the paper is to bring out an academic exercise, nothing political or personal in these issues. So this is one thing what is happening with the Indian scenario, that is the falling out of the federation or the idea of federal state. Now this is just my idea. I'm posing these questions to you. I'm not saying this is the way, but this is something for us to think. Now, this COVID has also exposed the fault lines of the Indian nation state. Indian nation state was having so many fault lines, and these fault lines were actually not visible during the normal times. But with the pandemic, these things became explicit, particularly in the case of migration. Because why do people migrate? Because of the loss of livelihood over there, or the lack of livelihood over there. So this brings to the stark inequality India as a nation is facing on geographical basis. This brings us to the question of regional disparities that this Indian nation is facing. This also brings us to the question of the caste hierarchies that the nation is facing, because it was during the pandemic time, the caste discrepancies connected with the class nexus. Because who was the worst affected by this pandemic? It was the poor people who were at the lower strata of the society. And people who were at the lower strata of the society were not just the people who were economically poor, but also socially poor. So economic marginalization can be seen as a function of your social marginalization. So this question of caste comes up there. How India has exposed these fault lines is very much up there. Again, the fault line what India has exposed itself is the question of gender disparities. Now regarding the gender disparities, we know the people or the one gender that was worst hit by this pandemic is the women. They have lost their livelihood like anything. Now, if you are at a family and if you are above 18 years of age, a woman, you will be married off no matter what. Now, these are all the anti-woman attitude that India was showing. There is scarcity of food, and who will be left out without food in this pandemic? The woman. So all these things were happening even otherwise also, but these got deepened and exposed to the larger community under the rubric or under the auspices of COVID. Or COVID acted as a lens for us to understand how deepened the inequalities and how deepened the fault lines of Indian nation state is. Now to again move on, this is also connected with one more thing, which is the normalization process that happened in Indian national state or Indian nation state at the backdrop of the COVID pandemic. Now, if you can recollect, most of us don't remember because history teaches us not just to remember but also to forget, right? And most of us forgets the things which are not happening in our day-to-day life. Now, if you remember, there were so many things that were happening in India before the pandemic. I'll remind you some of them. The CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act. Now we are not talking about CAA. There was this farmers bill protest which is still going on, but we are not caring about it. There were issues of the Kashmir Article 377 and all. Now we are not talking about it. There were challenges put forward by the election manipulations were being talked. Now we are not talking about it. We have normalized all these internal issues. We have kept away all these internal issues to a great farther distance so that we can focus only on what? The COVID. So COVID has actually done a external differentiation and internal standardization. The unseen side of COVID-19 is it has made us blur towards the different issues that this country is already facing, particularly the nation and Kerala also. In both places, we have the GDP falling. Now, this is not just because of the COVID. I'm sure Dr. X.S. Lal, who had spoke to you in the forenoon, might have mentioned this. This has deepened, this have rotten because of COVID, but this was not created by COVID. Now we have normalized all these issues just by using one word, COVID. So this is what is happening over here. Now this question of central state relations, that needs to be understood and that needs to be questioned. But we are not doing it. Whatever the ideas the center is putting forward, we need to follow it. Now Indian Constitution doesn't envisage that. The Indian Constitution always calls for a dialogue between the center and the state, but we are not doing it. The first lockdown, you remember, the first lockdown was ill-conceived and it was made on the national level. Then they have changed it into the empowering the states and the district panchayats for the lockdowns. Now this power relations between center and state, that also has got normalized. Whatever the center is saying, the state needs to follow. I think the only state which have responded and directly brought up this discourse of center-state relationship is Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu has came up with this idea. It is not the center government or the central government, but it is a union of state or the union government. It is a union of different governments or the different states. It is not the central government. Now these things which I was trying to say, from this farmers bill to CAA to Kashmir to election manipulation to center state relationships, all these things, they are actually being subsumed under this grand question of COVID. Now this doesn't mean that these issues are not there. These issues are already there and that needs to be understood and that needs to be addressed. So I was supposed to stop at 3 o'clock, but I have exceeded my time. It's 3:05. I'll just conclude the discussion, whatever we were saying. What we were talking today.
Sir, you can take as much time you need, sir.
Yeah, okay. We want to have some. If there is some questions, also I would like to listen to that also. So what I was trying to say was, we were trying to understand nationalism first and foremost. We tried to understand what is nationalism, how a national state is conceived, and what are the contours in which nation state has emerged. Then we went on to discuss the theories of nationalism, in which we discussed about the various scholars and various theorists on nationalism. Then I went on to discuss how COVID-19 pandemic has changed the conception of nationalism. I have raised mainly 3 questions in front of you. First question was, are we witnessing the end phase of nationalism? Or are we witnessing the end of nationalism as a phase? We discussed and we understood that no, we are not witnessing the end of nationalism, but rather what we are discussing or what we are witnessing is the deepening of nationalism. Then we went on to discuss, if there is a deepening of nationalism, what is the kind of nation state that we are witnessing? That was the second question. I argued that, which you don't need to agree. You can have your own versions and you can have your own views on that. But what, through my readings, what I understood is this pandemic has or had all the potential of turning or conceiving a bureaucratic totalitarian regime. This pandemic has given the space for the creation of a surveillance state. And connected to it, I also argued that there was a reconceptualization of the territories or the territorial conceptions of the nation state. The third question, what I raised before you was, What is the Indian specific unseen side of COVID? All those things which I have raised in the first and second question, it's there. Now, apart from that, what is there in the Indian scenario? I have pointed out 3 things in the Indian scenario. First one is the falling of idea of federation of states. Second one is the exposed fault line of the Indian nation state. Third one is how there was a normalization of the internal issues of India. So based on that, I was talking. I was just revising whatever we were doing. Dear friends, our time is limited, but our discussion on our words on nationalism is unlimited. I would like to cut short my monologue, and I would like to have an open space for more discussions, debates, and deliberations. As Kate Jenkins have rightly said, past and history are 2 things. Many events might have happened in the past, but since they are not recorded, they don't become a part of the history. So what we study as history is largely the recorded history. So what determines what needs to be recorded and what need not be recorded? It is determined by the power relations of the time. Or in other words, with the change in the social and political relations, we will have new versions of social sciences. History as a discipline, or for that matter, social science itself, it is limited. Why I am saying history is limited is, as I said, past and history are 2 different things. And history, what we study as history with the capital H1, we are actually studying or covering only the bigger parts of a jigsaw puzzle. There is a jigsaw puzzle in front of us. My attempt, or what I have been attempting to do for the past 1 hour, was to fill in some of the missing parts of this jigsaw puzzle. It is only with more social science researchers we will be able to figure out what really was happening. I hope my paper will ignite some of my audience to take up the same. And maybe in future, more research works will be happening and we will have a better clarity of this jigsaw puzzle of COVID-19 and nationalism. Till then, the mystery in history will continue. As Noam Chomsky said, the general population does not know what is happening, and they don't even know that they don't know it. The Bishop Abraham Memorial College, Thuruthicad, is actually trying to follow what Noam Chomsky is saying. They are trying to portray what the general population is not seeing. The faculty are doing a tremendous work in this, because the Faculty of Arts is trying to give you the unseen sides of COVID-19, which normally we don't think or we don't care about. So I appreciate the Faculty of Arts of BAM College for taking up the same. So let me conclude. I would like to thank every one of you for your patient listening for the past 1 hour. I also thank Dr. Biju T. George, the principal of the college, the management of the college, and all the staff of the college. Especially, I would like to place the thanks to 2 people, Dr. Alex Matthew, the program coordinator, and Mr. Joseph Kuruvula, is the head of the Department of Economics. Mr. Joseph Kuruvula has been following up the conversations with me. He has been very kind enough to take me and bring me to this session. And above that, I would like to thank Dr. Alex Matthew. He is not just a senior colleague, though we are of the same subject. He is a senior colleague of mine. Not just that, Dr. Alex Matthew has always been a mentor and my well-wisher all throughout my life from my days of graduation. He wanted me to study in Madras Christian College. He has actually encouraged me to go outside Kerala. So not just for inviting me, but also for being a mentor all throughout my life. I would like to thank Dr. Alex Matthew and also Mr. Joseph Kuruvula, the head of the Department of Economics, for having me here. Now, similarly, I would like to thank Dr. Thompson K. Alex. He has been very kind enough to coordinate for this function. Now there is Dr. Einstein Edwin, who has been active in responding for this session also. There is Ens Matthew, there is Geeta Lakshmi, there is Mr. Arun Matthew, who has given us the welcome address. Then there is Sharina, there is Alfie, there is Anu. I thank all of them from the bottom of my heart, and I wish you all a very good day. And I hope the chair will take up the session now and we will have some discussions if there are any questions. Thank you.
Okay, sir, thank you for such a marvelous delivery. And dear participants, it's the time for discussion, and you can ask your question to your resource person.
Hello, sir. In your opinion, what was the joint role that to be played by central and state government to face such a pandemic situation in the national perspective?
Yeah. Would you please tell me your name? I cannot see you.
Sir, I am Joseph Kuruvula.
Okay, I am sorry, I cannot see it in the
economics.
No, I know you. I am saying I'm just not able to see you in the not the Google Meet, the other one, Microsoft Teams. So that is right. Sorry, sir. Mr. Edward, should I be taking more questions or should I answer this? How is it been done?
Sir, you can answer this question, sir.
Should I answer all together or should I wait for more questions? What should I be doing?
No, you can ask. You can answer individually, sir.
Okay. So thank you, Joseph, sir, for your question. So this question of joint role of central and state government. Now, this is a question which we should be thinking a lot, particularly if there are students from political science. There was joint effort from both central and state government. It is true. But let me tell you, there is some issues or some problems or some challenges also, because mostly what we are seeing in history, there is less coordination between the central and state governments if those two governments are of different party. So what usually happens is political parties keeps their ideology and keeps their existence above the interest of the nation. I'm not here to blame any party. What I'm trying to say is, suppose party A is in center and party B is ruling in Kerala and party A is ruling in Tamil Nadu. So the central has a better relation with Tamil Nadu than it has with Kerala. So all these vaccine slots availability will be given to Tamil Nadu instead of Kerala. But the real grave situation is in Kerala. Now this Kerala, Tamil Nadu and Central is hypothetical exams. So this joint role of state and central mitigation has not manifested itself to the maximum. Because as I pointed out in the talk also, there is some sort of communication gap or some sort of dialogical gap or some sort of lack of space of discussions and deliberations between the state and the center. And it is particularly because of that we had a failed lockdown. Now it's not just a question of central and state. It is also the question of state and the district panchayat. And it is also the question of district panchayat and the individual. Now there are two ways of doing the same thing. One of the ways is you can pressure it on people. The second way is people accepts and demands for the same. Here what we are trying to do, or rather there is only joint effort from the central and state government on one thing, which is putting direct pressure on the people. Now that will not help. What you need to do is we need to take up the responsibility rather than putting the blame on people or rather than putting the blame on the citizen. The state structures need to take what the responsibility of things that has been happening, and from that only we can work on. So I think I have answered your question in my own way. I'm not sure if it is clear.
Clear, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Sir, I have one question. I'm agree with most of the statement and the presentation done by you. I'm Abraham Gurian, Department of History. So my question is, this problem with pandemic happen all over the world. It's not in a particular state or particular country. So in globally, these issues are facing confronting. So how in that circumstance, how can we reduce these problem in the level of nationalism, something like that? For me, in all the world, both developed and developed country must work together. So until and unless all are not being safe, no one is going to escape. For example, if that problem solved in a particular continent, particular country, same time still this problem is going on, is not at solved, it will create another problem in later on. Because in the present scenario, where all the nations are working together. So in that circumstance, how can we reduce the topic in the concept like nationalism? That's one question. Another question, in our country, for example, the method and the strategy and the steps taken by the states for solving the issues are different from one another. As you said, sometimes the states are not at all allowing the people in the other state to enter or travel even for the medical purpose. There's no proper coordination from the state level and in the central level. So very very pathetic situation we are going on. So in that circumstance, all people, both the government and private, even NGOs and all the level, even in the social organization and religious sector must work together without any vested interest or regional, something like. Otherwise, we are not going to overcome the problem. So how it would be able to coordinate? There's no political demarcation or any other social or caste, something like that. Otherwise, I don't think we are not going to overcome this problem. So this is a common enemy. There's no division based on developing Asia, Europe, Latin America, something like that. So, okay, what is your opinion on my even a suggestion and my question?
Thank you very much, Abraham Kurian sir. It's happy to be with you. Abraham Kurian sir has not just said the problems, but he has given us a solution. He has mainly talked about two issues. One about the on the global level and the other one about the national level. In the global level, the nations are not cooperating with each other, and on the national level, the states are not cooperating with each other. Now, this is exactly what I was pointing out in the beginning of the lecture. Novel coronavirus or the COVID-19 pandemic is not a regional issue. It is not a national issue. It's a global question. A global question can have only global answers. A global question cannot be confronted by a national answer. A global question cannot be confronted by a regional answer. Can we say that I am vaccinated, my father is vaccinated, my mother is vaccinated, we are safe? I also need to worry about my neighbor. If my neighbor is not vaccinated, there is high possibility that I will also get the disease. Now there are two ways of doing it. Either I can help my neighbor to get vaccinated, or I can keep him away by social distancing to save myself. Now how long will I keep him away? I need his cooperation. I need his support. It is the same question which comes in the global level or in the state level. How long Karnataka can stop the entry of Kerala people? How long the Western nations can stop the coming of the Asians? It's not a solution. So in my opinion, there are two ways of confronting the issue. One is either by cooperating with each other, or the other one is bringing competition. Sadly, we are using the competition method. But rather what we should have been using is the cooperation method. Consider the case of New Zealand. New Zealand has reduced COVID virus to bare minimum in the beginning itself. At that time, US was battling on COVID. India is still battling on COVID. Kerala is still battling on COVID. But are there any measures that we are learning from New Zealand? Or are there any measures which we are learning from any other places? We need to share information. Sharing is caring. On global level, there is the need of the intervention of United Nations Organization, the UN, the WHO. They need to make sure that information, and that the correct information is circulated among the different nation states so that everyone can benefit. On the national level, there needs to be the coordination committee involving not just the politicians, but the health activists, the NGOs, the college professors, the university professors, the academicians. It is only with the combined effort of the humanity the entire nation can sustain. We are living in a particular period in history in which there is no escape from globalization. We are not living in islands. I am very much a Indian, but at that same time, there will be 100 of things in my room which is Chinese in origin. The laptop which I am touching, it might be an American made one, but the parts inside this is Chinese. It might have been shipped from UK. So what I'm trying to say is the idea of global village should be used to the maximum to confront this question of global pandemic. So to conclude the answer, I am again pointing out the same thing what I have been saying from the beginning. Global question. Pandemic is a global question. COVID-19 is a pandemic question. Nationalism is not the answer to that. It needs a global answer. I hope I have answered the question.
Thanks.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Dear participants, do you have any other questions? Yes, sir. I am Thompson. I have
Yes,
one
sir.
question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
This is in connection with the last question, and it is in connection with your answer also. Nowadays, MNCs, the multinational corporations, are playing crucial role in the COVID situation, especially in the research area, especially in the medical research. And what is the role of MNCs in redefining the concept of nationalism? Are they support or they stand for globalization? I hope MNCs will take the leader position than nationalism.
Yes, sir.
So what is your?
Yes, okay.
What is your?
Okay. Thank you, Thompson, sir. You have been very kind enough to follow up all these conversations also we are happening. This is a very important question which you have just raised. The role of MNCs. The name itself suggests that multinational companies. Now, multinational companies. Now, the national companies or the nation state, it is easy for us to identify them. It is easy for us to understand why Donald Trump is thinking in such way. It is easy for us to think why Joe Biden is thinking in that way. It is easy for us to think that why Jacinda is thinking in that way. It is easy for us to think why Narendra Modi is thinking in that way. But we don't know why Ambani is thinking. We don't know how Bill Gates is thinking. We don't know how Sundar Pichai is thinking. Now, this is particular the issue. Now, to come to a question, yes, theoretically, multinational companies goes against the idea of nationalism. With the more multinational companies, we have more globalization and more open up market and more liberal nation states. But that doesn't mean that nationalism is ending. They subscribe to some nations. And why do they subscribe? They subscribe to nations just because they have a comparative advantage, a term which usually been coming in economics. They have the comparative advantage of labor in Africa in comparison to the US. Why do there is outsourcing of softwares to India? Because the amount of money MNCs needs to spend in India is very, very less that is compared to US. That is why there is outsourcing. So MNCs will never solve the issue of nationalism, but they will use the question of nationalism for their own gain. So you cannot expect MNCs to tackle the crisis, particularly in the case of COVID. Now, why they are investing on COVID thing is, health sector is one of the best places to invest. It is giving you a sure shot. Now that happens everywhere, not just for the multinational companies. Even if in our own personal life, what do? We take health insurances. And to make the point more clear, I would bring out this example. If there are kids in the family, there is rare chance we will send them to study in a liberal arts and science. And even there is less chance we will send them to social sciences. But rather we will send them to what? Medical field. Why? Because it is a sure shot investment. It's the same thing. MNCs also does invest in health sector because they have very sure of their return and nothing to connect it with their philanthropy. There are people who are doing good things. I'm not saying all MNCs are bad or MNCs should be banned and all. They are doing good, but at the points of crisis, we cannot ask though for their accountability and responsibility because it's not a public company, it is private persons. So in that sense, there we need to bring the distinction between the government and that of the MNCs. So if there is a confrontation between MNC and that of the nation state, my personal opinion is I will go with the nation state, and that is my personal thinking and personal decision. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions?
Hello, sir. I'm Arun Matthew.
Yes, Arun.
Sir, as you told that the area of nationalism is reducing and the intensity of nationalism is increasing. Right. And I have a question with the vaccine negotiation, which means, as you told, many nations hoarding vaccines, just like Germany, they are not willing to export or share their excess vaccines to other nations. So my question is, but if we take some other nations like India, Israel, so our nation, India is exporting vaccines to many nations, many other nations, without any kind of discrimination, whether the nation is rich or poor. And if we take Israel, and also India is exporting vaccines to Pakistan too. We know the classic rivalry of India-Pakistan. And also, if you take the case of Israel, Israel is exporting vaccines to Iran too. They are also classic rivals. So my question is, as you, sir, you already told that nationalism is not the answer for COVID-19. It's a global thing, and it needs a global answer. So my question is vaccine negotiation is the answer for that global problem?
Are you trying to say that exporting of vaccines will reduce the national rivalry? Are you trying to say that?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
That's what you meant, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're true. I am in support of what you are saying, because if there is a possibility, now this is also diplomacy. This is also a question of diplomacy. For those of who have done IR, international relations, know that we do certain things not because we have it. We do certain things which because we need to do it. Now today, Jaishankar is going to negotiate with Taliban. Now, we might be thinking, why should India be doing that? India is doing that. It's not because India is happy with Taliban or something, but India need to do that, because if India is giving space for Pakistan to approach Afghanistan, then it will be disastrous. So the question is, India is constructing Chabar port not because India is a completely well settled or infrastructural developed nation. India is doing it because the strategic position needs to be kept safe. So whatever be the reasons for people or for nation to donate and to export vaccine, that's a different thing. I'm not going into the politics of it. I would be saying it is a good thing, because as Mr. Arun Matthew was telling, this will melt the rivalries between nations. Suppose if we are getting all the vaccines from Pakistan, this will automatically gives a way to melt the rivalry between India and Pakistan. And just like Mr. Arun is expecting, I am also expecting we all can cordially sustain. And after all, hope is a good thing. As that we all see in the Shawshank Redemption movie, hope is a very good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think that time up. So I think no other questions. So it's the time for winding up this session. So I invite Ms. Sharina CK, Faculty of Department of Political Science, delivering words.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. It is very honor for me to get an opportunity for a vote of thanks. And firstly, I would like to thank Mr. Arun Matthew, Faculty of Economics, for the welcome speech. Then I would like to thank Mr. Christy Alex Varghese, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Christian Malabar College, Calicut, for the keynote address on the topic, Contemplating Nationalism in the Pandemic World. Then I would like to thank Dr. Abhilash Babu, STRIDE coordinator of the MG University, for his note on the STRIDE. Then I would like to thank all the participants, students, and other teachers, and all the attendees here presented. Then I would like to thank the organizing team and their hard work for conducting such a very great success event. Finally, I would like to thank all the people and all the students and all the people who are part of this program and make it a great success. Thank you everyone. Thank you.
Christy sir, thank you very much. It's a thoughtful session. We got so much issues, such problems for your talk. Thank you. And this is the time of weighing up. Today's session is over. Tomorrow we have 2 sessions. The session will start on 10 a.m. and one on 2 p.m. Okay. And feedback form through